You're listening to Rubble and Ruin. Welcome to the End, a dystopian zombie story told in 12 parts, written by Jarrett Rush and produced by SciFi Serials.com. Part 9. I walked past that small park again the day after everything crumbled apart. It was even more crowded than when I'd left. There was a din of voices, all of them slightly raised. A general sense of worry pulsed from the place in waves. I looked into the crowd. The small bunches from the night before were gone. It was now one big mass of people, an impotent little mob with nowhere to go. I was headed to my apartment, going home to gather things and figure out what my next steps were going to be. The air had taken on its now familiar brown haze, everything bathed in a light khaki. The amount of destruction was still shocking, and around every corner was another gasp, a familiar building or site left in a pile. All of this was stuff I missed in the dark and confusion of the night before. People were still on the streets, all of us looking at what had become of our city. Well, their city. Dallas was still too new to be mine. This still wasn't home. It was getting there. I had started to find my spots. There was a pizza place a few minutes east of downtown that made this rectangular cracker crust pizza and served it on plastic lunch trays. It was an old place, a family-owned spot that had been around forever. It was delicious. I found a coffee shop a block or so from my apartment. It was just a hole-in-the-wall place with a counter and a few two-seat tables. The lady who worked the counter in the mornings was cute, and she'd finally learned my order. I'd show up, get in line, and my drink would be ready by the time I got to the register to pay. So I'd started to set my paths. I'd begun to find the routines that make life feel comfortable and familiar. Those things that you miss when you're away from home for too long. The walk to my apartment took the better part of that day, but I hadn't hurried. My curiosity often got the better of me, and I let myself go off course more than a few times to investigate what had happened to this location that I knew, or to see where a noise was coming from. People were out sitting on curbs. They were head in hands crying. That, or they were still a bit stunned, still in shock and not sure what to do next. Something in me said I should offer them some kind of comfort, but I didn't know what I'd say. I couldn't tell them that it'd be okay, that everything would get better. I didn't believe it, especially then. I don't know that I believe it now. So I kept walking and got to my apartment as the sun was about to set. I dug in a linen closet for candles I'd bought for a date. I was going for romance, but she wasn't interested. But it was okay. Now I had light. I placed the candles on the coffee table and lit them. The room glowed, and I sat on the couch in an eerie silence. It was the deep quiet you get when you remove all ambient noise. I listened for neighbors but didn't hear any. The room got warm, and I got sleepy. I spun my legs up onto the couch and let myself drift off. I crashed fast and hard. It was the last good night of sleep I'd had until the scavenging run with Caroline to the doctor's office. I woke to chatter out in the stairwell. I looked through the peephole in the door expecting to find neighbors, but didn't. It was two guys, late 20s. They had bulging black trash bags over their shoulders, each close to overflowing with things that clearly weren't theirs. I double-checked the lock on my door. I grabbed a loaf of bread from the pantry and a half-eaten jar of peanut butter. I made a quick sandwich and waited. A couple moments later, the doorknob jiggled, then, wham. I'm assuming it was a boot into the door near the lock, trying to kick it in so they could rummage through my stuff. "Occupied," I shouted. A muted sorry from the other side, and that was it. I finished my sandwich, then started to gather what I needed. It was an unorganized scavenger hunt that I rushed through, spooked both by the silence and the looters. I grabbed too much of some things and not enough of others. I stuffed my pack full of everything I thought I'd need, then headed back out, locking my door behind me. I'd gone north the night before. That morning I went south. The streets a few blocks from my place weren't empty, but they were close. I passed guys my age who seemed lost, still taking in the new Dallas. They were still mentally having what happened and why conversations with themselves. I suppose I would have been too, but my background traveling actually helped me get past that part quickly. Not that I think missing a plane or a train or a bus is any actual equivalent to what had happened, but those moments when I had to suddenly reconfigure plans and shift travel arrangements, often in countries where I didn't speak the language, had taught me to adjust and think on my feet. That's all I was doing here. I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost or what I'd do long term. I was just thinking about what was next, and that was to take another step. You finished with your right foot. Now swing out your left. Keep moving forward. Interstate 30 was mostly elevated interchanges near downtown, and those had fallen in the initial assault. But just east of downtown, the highway, at least for a stretch, was still intact, and I found my way to the middle of it. The sun was beginning to set and darkness was coming on fast. Wind rattled through the trees off to my right, those that were still standing. As the breeze separated the branches, that's when I saw the fires that Maggie and Walter had set. They were like beacons, and, because of their intensity, I expected to find them surrounded by dozens of people congregating and consoling each other. I wasn't in the mood for it the other night, but this evening, a little human interaction didn't seem like a bad idea. So I climbed off the highway and into the neighborhoods I'd been warned to stay out of when I got to Dallas. The homes were old, and many didn't survive the barrage from a couple nights previous. My route to the fires was circuitous. By the time I got there, it was full dark, and the crowds that I'd expected were non-existent. Walter stood near the first fire, hugging a shotgun across his chest. He dropped it into his hands and let it hang loose in front of him as I approached. I raised my arms and put my hands up in front of me to show him that I wasn't armed. "Hello," I shouted. "Can I help you? Saw the fires. Was hoping you guys might welcome another to your camp." "Well." Walter tucked the butt of the gun under an arm and extended a hand for me to shake. "We have the room." He told me his name as he walked me down to the second fire and the women standing in a loose circle around it. I introduced myself, saying hello to Britt and Bethany first. Neither seemed overly interested, but I credited that to the early day shock that still hadn't worn off for many. Then Caroline came over and shook my hand with a smile, and behind her was her mom. "Hi," she said. "I'm Maggie.